Welcome to para and story level lesson activities for teaching at the right level in Namibia. So let's begin para and story level activities. They're going to start with your normal lesson plan. By now, we know that lesson plan quite well. It begins with an energizer. Energizers already happen. And we move to the charts. There are two different charts that you can use for para and story level children. You start with a fluency chart, which has the synonyms and antonyms and rhymes and all of that. And then you move to the sound spelling chart, which you use to build their spelling skills. On the fluency chart, just a couple of notes. We want to make sure we're always making full sentences whenever we do tenses or plurals or story parts, and make it fun, right? Use the popcorn strategy where you have one child say, for example, the tense for today, make a sentence such as we play football, and then they choose someone else, their own choice, who has to turn that into yesterday. And the yesterday child has to say, we played football, right? And that makes it just a little bit more fun. They're kind of catching each other out there and giving each other work, and that's quite interesting for the learners. Also, again, you want to focus verbal at first at these things and then introduce writing. If you're writing yourself on the chart. You're not necessarily making the learners come up and write their sentences because they will do that quite slowly. And the purpose of the activities at the beginning is just to build their ability to make those complete sentences. And then you want to focus on writing later, right? After you've already kind of gone through these objectives, you'd bring back the chart and it's like, okay, now you guys are going to write the sentences instead of me as the teacher. Another example is, for plurals, one child says the pen is on the desk and another child, they would call out their name, Maggie, you have to be the one to make it many, and they would say the pens are on the desk. These are intentionally written to not be technical, right? So it doesn't say plurals, plural and singular. It doesn't say past and present tense. It's avoiding those terms so that we make it as relatable to the students as possible. We're just talking about today, yesterday, one, and many. Then our common activities. You can use any common activity for the para and story level learners. You want to focus on the speaking fluency activities, right? The fluency activities at the bottom. Again, the first time you do them, you want to do them almost entirely verbally. And then you want to be writing some of the things down, right? So if they're doing picture reading, they're able to write the story about the picture, right? If they're doing charades, they come up with the words that go into the charades box, right? If they're doing storytelling, then they go and they write down that story. Basket game and word building, same idea. And you can also use word chain. Letter jump and twist, probably less likely to use with this group and less frequent. The same with flip cards, but word chain is good for all levels. You can use letter jump and twist and flip cards if you're working on specific sound spellings, right? And that would be a great way to practice those and learn those for the students. You can also put words in your letter jump instead of letters. Also, I want to introduce, I know we had some issues around not having enough activities once learners get to the story level. And so we're introducing a new common activity that's really great for teaching writing. That's quite student-centered. And it's called Correct the Incorrect. And what happens is, and I think we've probably all had this experience, you might have children who are, speaking in English, they might have some errors, right? They might have incorrect things that they're saying. So I built this list of sentences, these 6 sentences, based on what I've heard children say before. I'm not saying, John, you said the wrong thing. Let me write the wrong thing that you just said and tie it to you as a person to make you feel bad. I'm just taking note of that, right? That my children tend to make these mistakes. They are real mistakes that they will recognize. We want to highlight them and say, hey, I want you to say these things and write these things better. So for example, I'd like you to do this right now. So pause the video and I want you to correct what is incorrect about each of these sentences. So the sentences are, she did do her homework, am having 3 books, the thing was under the thing, I wanted to go to the bathroom, they kept laughing in the class, and Mike had stuff on the legs. What's the correct way to say those sentences? And I'm about to give you the answer. So do it first. Boom. Answers, right? She did her homework. I have 3 books, right? Making sure they're not starting the sentences in am. The markers under the desk, that is just encouraging them to use the exact words in English and not to use these kind of filler words like the thing is on the thing. Written, you want them to spell correctly, right? You want to make sure they know when do you do WH and when do you not. Making sure they use the when it's needed. And a lot of times they drop that H from the digraph TH when it's the bathroom. You can see the second to last sentence here, they kept laughing in the class. That's someone writing very phonetically, right? And not knowing the different spellings and sounds that should go into these words. And lastly, again, you don't want them to write vague sentences like Mike had stuff on the legs, right? You want to say Mike had pie up to his thighs, right? Those are nice, better, more specific terms. For reading, it's quite simple at Para and Story Letter. You're reading paras and stories. You're in the action. Use those storybooks, read as many as possible, right? And practice, practice, practice. If you are reading a story, make sure you're still decoding unknown words and you want to use the double clap whenever that happens. You might find a curious thing happens that you've now just read the whole story. You hand it over to the students or individual students come up to read, and they might read the first sentence correctly, but then pause, right? They might say, Saturday is my favorite day of the week. On 16 morning, I wake up at 7 o'clock. You want to, hey, we have a problem here. Saturday. Let's decode that word. Let's decode the word Saturday. A. And you might use your sound spelling chart to say, here's the UR spelling for and here's the AY spelling for A. So now we're going to do an exercise. Again, pause the video in pairs, go in pairs if you have someone else or by yourself. Identify 4 or 5 words in this story from the storybook. The story is called A Kid Called Kamkwamba. And you want to identify 4 or 5 words that have special sounds or alternative spellings that you think, you might want to highlight in your lesson, imagining you're having a lesson about this. And number 2, how would you teach this story for learners who actually can decode or read pretty well, but they struggle with comprehension? How would you teach this story? And think about, how is this story written? What's good about it? Does it have that beginning, middle, end? How might you kind of bring that awareness to the students? And how can you use the questions at the end of the story or different questions even about the story to build the comprehension skills of the learners? So pause here. I'm going to give you the answer. Well, my answer, obviously there's no one right answer, but an example answer. So here we go. So we're going to read this story. It's called A Kid Called Kamkwamba. William Kamkwamba this is a real story, by the way, changed the direction of his life. This is the true story about William at 14 years old. William loved electricity. He wanted to be a scientist, but in 2002, there was no rain. And you keep going, you read, right, the whole story. Then you have we read, right? And then it's time for them to come up. And what you would do is you would have already highlighted some of these words and ideas or phrases within the story to focus on to build comprehension and meaning. So in this case, I chose drought and thought, sitting idle, circuit breaker, and an inspiration from this story. So drought and thought is the spelling words that I want to talk about and kind of build their decoding skills on, because they're very odd and difficult words. Drought, out. That's weird. That O-U-G-H is making one sound. It's making this kind of ow sound. And then thought, oh, the O-U-G-H is making the ah sound. And so you can see that there, right? Here's the O-U-G-H at on and off, making the ah sound. And here's the O-U-G-H at ow, for out, making the ow sound, right? And you highlight that. And again, that's how the sound spelling chart works, that O-U-G-H makes 2 different sounds. That's why it shows up quite differently in these words. And if the children stumble on those words, you're able to point this out to them. So what should we do to build comprehension? I've chosen these 3 phrases, and I think they might not know what they are, so you don't want to just ignore it. You want to use your knowledge and explain these concepts, give the examples. What's a circuit breaker? right? If you don't know, Google it, right? What does it mean to be an inspiration? How do we sit idle? If you don't know, sometimes the children know and you don't, right? Another way to build comprehension is really extend talking about the same story as you go into the small group and do a story quiz about that story, right? Where they ask each other questions. So that was reading, and then we finally get to small groups. So in small groups, we have doing a mind map of a story, missing words, and story quiz. So make your life easy, you know, for writing. Use the story questions at the bottom as a prompt. They're a perfect prompt, right? What crazy dreams do you have for yourself? What do you do to feel better when you are sad? Great writing prompt, right? After you read this story. And lastly, writing, you can mind map a story, which has a very clear procedure. We have all the students brainstorm different words. They vote on the word that they want to put in the center of the mind map. And then from that word, they try to build a story. They can also rewrite you know, a story in this way, but it's mostly useful for building their own news stories, right? So you might have the word I don't know, blackboard in the middle, right? And then you might have the teacher wrote on the blackboard, the students scratched the blackboard, the teacher got upset that the students were scratching the blackboard, the students apologized. Boom. That is the mind mapping a story. So they're giving sentences, right, about the concept in the middle. You can also put a phrase in the middle of the mind map. So for example, a great phrase that I like to use is two friends go on an adventure in the middle of the mind map. And then you see what story do they come up with, right? It's almost like putting a topic in the middle. So that's it. That's the parent story level. Our last activity is for you to think about all the levels now. Let's bring it all together. Here are the different common activities and activities within TaRL. And I want you to think about how do you tailor each of these to the right level so that you're teaching those activities at the right level. So what do you do in a letter and jump and twist for paragraph and story versus word versus BL? What do you do in basket game for BL versus Word versus PS, right? And you're thinking about, well, what would I do differently in the implementation of these activities for the different levels? Good luck.